Welcome to Mr. Kelin Stories. Get ready for thrilling, emotional, and life-changing stories that will keep you hooked. Here, we bring you powerful tales full of suspense, heartwarming moments, and deep life lessons that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. Some stories will shock you, some will move you to tears, but all of them will make you feel something real. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. The sound of the hotel lobby's grand chandelier, chiming ever so slightly in the gentle air conditioning, filled Lisa Williams's ears as she walked past the polished marble floors. The scent of fresh lilies, placed meticulously at the entrance every morning, blended with the faint aroma of expensive colognes lingering in the air from the wealthy guests who passed through. It was another day, another long shift, another set of pristine rooms to maintain. Lisa adjusted the neatly pressed uniform she wore with pride. The dark blue fabric, embroidered with the hotel's golden logo on the left side, had become almost like armor to her, a reminder that no matter how invisible she felt among the elite clientele, she was a woman of dignity and hard work. Her footsteps were steady, her posture upright. She was a maid, but she was also a dreamer. Lisa had been working at the Regal Heights Hotel, one of the most prestigious five-star hotels in New York, for the past 5 years. Every day, she entered rooms that most people could only dream of stepping into. The sheer wealth on display, the chandeliers that cost more than her annual salary, the silk bedding imported from Italy, the designer furniture crafted by hand, none of it fazed her anymore. She had long learned that money didn't necessarily mean class. Some of the richest guests she encountered were also the rudest, and some of the most generous were the quiet ones who never flaunted their wealth. Still, no matter who occupied the rooms, Lisa carried out her work with the same level of care. She cleaned not just because it was her job, but because she believed in leaving a space better than she found it. But there were days like today, when she felt the weight of her circumstances pressing against her chest. Lisa had dreams, big ones. She had once wanted to be an interior designer, someone who brought beauty to homes and spaces, someone who created environments that made people feel something. But dreams, as she had learned, required more than talent. They required opportunity. They required money. And money had never been something Lisa had in abundance. She had grown up in a small apartment in Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who had done her best to provide for her and her younger brother. Life had been tough. They had learned to stretch a meal, to find joy in the simplest things, to never take kindness for granted. And perhaps that was why, even in a job where she was often overlooked, Lisa never let bitterness take root in her heart. Instead, she worked hard, tucked her dreams away safely, and reminded herself that even if she wasn't designing the luxurious spaces she cleaned, she was still making them beautiful in her own way. A special assignment. That evening, as Lisa clocked in for her shift, she was handed her daily room assignments by her supervisor, a stern but fair woman named Mrs. Delgado. "Lisa," Mrs. Delgado said, adjusting her reading glasses as she scanned the list. "You're on presidential suite duty tonight." Lisa raised an eyebrow. That was unusual. The presidential suite was normally assigned to senior staff, not regular maids like her. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked, glancing at the clipboard. Mrs. Delgado gave her a sharp look. "I don't make mistakes, Williams. The usual maid called in sick. You up for it or not?" Lisa straightened her posture. "Of course, ma'am." Mrs. Delgado nodded approvingly. "Good. Clean it well and don't linger. VIP guest, VIP guest." Lisa had learned not to ask questions. The guests who stayed in that suite were usually business tycoons, celebrities, or politicians. Some were kind, others were unbearable, but none of them ever really saw her. She was just the help. That was fine. Lisa didn't care about who stayed in the suite. To her, it was just another room, another set of pristine white sheets to tuck in, another floor to mop, another bathroom mirror to wipe until it gleamed like a diamond. She had no idea that this particular room, this particular guest, would change her life forever. The presidential suite occupied the top floor of the hotel, accessible only by a private elevator. As Lisa stepped inside, she felt a slight pang of something unspoken in her chest. Not envy, not quite, just wonder. She had seen this suite before, but never had the chance to clean it herself. The doors slid open to reveal a space larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the breathtaking skyline of New York, where city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds against the velvet night. Plush, cream-colored furniture filled the space, accented by gold-trimmed tables and designer sculptures. It was the kind of place where people sipped champagne in robes that cost more than her entire month's salary. Lisa inhaled deeply, then exhaled, shaking off the awe. She wasn't here to admire the place. She was here to work. She began with her usual routine, moving with precision and care. She dusted every surface, wiped down the massive glass coffee table, fluffed the extravagant pillows, and adjusted the heavy curtains so they framed the view just right. The bathroom was next. The marble counters were spotless, but she still polished them until they reflected the chandelier above, like a mirror. She replaced the designer soaps, refolded the embroidered hand towels, and straightened the silver tray of complimentary colognes. There was something oddly peaceful about cleaning. The rhythmic motion, the quiet focus, it allowed her mind to wander. For a moment she imagined what it would be like to be a guest here instead of the help, to be someone who didn't have to clean up after others, to be someone who belonged in spaces like these. She quickly shook the thought away. It was a dangerous thing to dream beyond your reality. Lisa glanced at the clock. She was nearly done. Just a few more finishing touches, and she could leave, but fate had other plans. Just as she reached for her cleaning supplies, she heard it. The unmistakable sound of a keycard being inserted into the door. Her heart jumped. No one was supposed to be back this early. Before she could react, the door clicked open, and standing there, stepping into the room with an air of power and authority, was a man she never expected to meet. Ethan Cole, a billionaire. A man who could buy the world with the swipe of a pen. And at that moment, Lisa Williams, just a maid, just the help, was standing in his presence. She didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything. The rhythmic strokes of Lisa's cloth against the marble countertop filled the silent grandeur of the presidential suite. The room smelled of fresh linen and lavender, a scent she always found soothing. She hummed softly, an old tune her mother used to sing while working double shifts to make ends meet. For Lisa, cleaning was more than just a job. It was a moment of peace, a break from the chaos of the outside world. Here, in these empty, luxurious rooms, she was alone with her thoughts, with no one to judge her or remind her of where she stood in life. She wiped down the massive kitchen island, admiring how the polished marble gleamed under the soft glow of the pendant lights. It was almost therapeutic, seeing a space go from slightly disordered to absolutely perfect, as if, in this small way, she had control over something in her life. Just as she reached for the last cloth on her cart, she heard it. Click. The unmistakable sound of a keycard sliding into the suite's electronic lock. Lisa froze. A second later, the door swung open with a quiet but deliberate force, the kind that only people accustomed to power exhibited. Her heart leaped into her throat. No one was supposed to be here. Guests were almost always out during cleaning hours. Had she misread the schedule? Her mind raced. Did she take too long? Had management failed to warn her that the guest would be back early? But before she could move, before she could even turn to face the doorway, she felt it. A presence. A presence that filled the room like a silent storm. Lisa swallowed hard and slowly turned. Standing just a few feet away was a man who needed no introduction. Ethan Cole, tall, impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sleek black suit that fit him so well it looked as if it had been stitched onto his body. His dark hair was neatly styled, not a single strand out of place, yet it carried the effortless carelessness of a man who had far too much on his mind to fuss over details. His presence radiated power. Even if Lisa hadn't recognized him from the magazines, she would have known. Men like him didn't need introductions. Ethan Cole wasn't just any billionaire. He was the billionaire. The kind people whispered about in awe and fear. The kind whose name alone sent stock markets into a frenzy. He was ruthless, brilliant, and untouchable, and right now his piercing blue eyes were locked onto her. Lisa's breath hitched. For a single electric second, the world shrank down to just the two of them. His gaze was sharp, a businessman's gaze, calculating, assessing. He was clearly unaccustomed to surprises, and she was an unexpected variable in his otherwise perfectly structured world. Lisa stood completely still, unsure of what to say. Should she speak first? Apologize? Step away? But something in Ethan's expression shifted, as if he, too, was momentarily thrown off balance. For the briefest moment, his eyes flickered with something unreadable. Curiosity, irritation, amusement. It was impossible to tell, and then just as quickly as it came, it was gone. His expression hardened. Ethan took a slow step forward, closing the space between them just enough to make the air feel heavier. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, clipped, not angry, but firm, the kind of voice that demanded answers. Lisa quickly straightened her posture, instinctively reverting to professionalism. I was just cleaning, sir," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I didn't realize you'd be back so soon." She hated how small her voice sounded compared to his. Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Lisa had been in the presence of wealthy men before, arrogant businessmen, spoiled socialites, self-important politicians. But this was different. Ethan Cole was different. There was something about him that sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, not quite, but something that made her pulse quicken in a way she didn't understand. He was intimidating, but not in a way that made her want to run, in a way that made her want to figure him out. But that was dangerous thinking. Men like him didn't care about people like her. Lisa lowered her gaze, a quiet apology forming on her lips. She would finish cleaning quickly and leave. That was the smart thing to do. But before she could move, before she could escape his piercing gaze, Ethan spoke again. This time his voice was different. Softer. "You've been working here long?" Lisa's head snapped up in surprise. Was he asking about her? The question was so unexpected, so out of place, that she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. She hesitated. 5 years, she answered finally, though she wasn't sure why he even cared. Ethan gave a small nod, as if filing that information away for later. His face was unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes. Lisa didn't know what was happening, why he was looking at her like that, why her heart was suddenly beating faster, why the air in the room felt different than it had moments ago. But she did know one thing. Whatever had just happened between them, this silent, charged moment, was far from ordinary. And something told her that this was only the beginning. The air in the suite had shifted. Gone was the stillness that Lisa had felt just moments before. In its place was an uncomfortable tension, thick and unyielding, wrapping around her like an invisible force. Ethan Cole's icy blue eyes lingered on her for just a second longer before his brows furrowed. His jaw tightened, the sharp edges of his cheekbones more pronounced in the dim lighting. He exhaled slowly through his nose, a quiet sigh that carried more weight than words ever could. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, clipped like a blade cutting through the silence. Lisa felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her composure. She had dealt with difficult guests before. She quickly straightened up, her hands instinctively clasping together in front of her. Never slouch, always professional. That's what Mrs. Delgado had drilled into her from day one. I was just cleaning, sir," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I didn't know you'd be back early." She wanted to sound confident, unaffected by his presence, but something about the way he was looking at her made her feel small. Ethan didn't immediately respond. He rubbed his temples as if this entire interaction was nothing more than an inconvenience, like a minor glitch in his otherwise perfect schedule. Then, with a sigh that reeked of exhaustion rather than anger, he muttered, "I don't like people in my space." And just like that, he walked past her. No aggression, no hostility, just dismissal, like she wasn't even there. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, fingers gripping the damp cleaning cloth in her hand. She had been through this before. Many times, in fact. People with money often saw the world differently. To them, maids, waiters, drivers, the people who made their lives easier, were nothing more than background characters. Lisa had encountered guests who had looked straight through her, as if she were a mere shadow in their presence. She had dealt with men who spoke over her, women who barely spared her a glance, socialites who never once said thank you for the fresh towels or turned down beds. She had learned not to let it bother her, and yet this time, it did. It was a strange, unwelcome feeling. Perhaps it was because of the intensity of the moment before, when their eyes had met, when for a fleeting second she thought she saw something in his gaze beyond indifference. Perhaps it was because, deep down, some naive part of her had hoped he would be different. But he wasn't. Ethan Cole was just like all the rest, number worse, because his dismissal felt more personal. Lisa forced herself to breathe, inhaling deeply before turning back toward her cleaning supplies. Just finish the job and leave. That was all she had to do. But her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the polishing spray. Behind her, she could hear Ethan moving about the suite, his heavy footsteps against the sleek hardwood floors, the soft rustling of his jacket as he shrugged it off and tossed it onto the back of a chair. Lisa resisted the urge to look at him. He wasn't worth the space in her mind. Still, her ears picked up on every sound, the faintest sigh, the unzipping of a leather bag, the clinking of glass as he poured himself a drink. She knew she had two choices. She could hurry up and leave, pretend this interaction never happened, or number. There was no or. She had no reason to say anything else to him, no reason to care. So why did her voice betray her? Lisa didn't even realize she had spoken until the words had already left her lips. "I won't be long, sir." Her voice was soft but firm. She wasn't asking for his permission. She was simply letting him know that she had a job to do, and she intended to do it. For the first time since entering the suite, Ethan hesitated. She saw it in the way his body stilled, the way his fingers momentarily tightened around the crystal glass in his hand. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Lisa noticed. Ethan turned his head slightly, his gaze flicking toward her, unreadable. Something in his expression shifted, though it was gone before she could grasp what it was. Then, without a word, he took a sip of his drink and turned away, dismissing her once again. Lisa swallowed against the lump in her throat. Fine. Let him ignore her. She wasn't here for his approval. But as she finished wiping down the last of the counters and gathered her supplies, one thought lingered in her mind, a thought she knew was dangerous. Why did he hesitate? Why, just for a second, did it feel like Ethan Cole wasn't as cold as he pretended to be? And more importantly, why did she care? The silence in the suite was heavy, thick like the New York fog before dawn. Lisa moved with practiced efficiency, her body moving on autopilot as she focused on finishing quickly. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the mop, but she ignored it. She wanted to be done. Done with this room, done with this tension, done with the way Ethan Cole's presence made the air feel too thick to breathe. She dipped the mop back into the bucket, the water rippling softly before she dragged it across the marble floor in smooth, precise strokes. Her gaze flicked toward Ethan, against her better judgment. He sat at the edge of the sleek leather sofa, his elbows resting on his knees, one hand holding his glass of scotch while the other absent-mindedly ran through his dark hair. His expression was unreadable, his sharp jaw clenched as if his thoughts were tangled in something deeper than her presence. Lisa quickly looked away. Just finish the job and leave. She turned, stepping toward the last, unclean section of the suite. And that's when it happened. Her foot slipped. It happened so fast. One moment she was standing, the next she was falling. Her breath caught in her throat as her body tilted backward, her arms instinctively flailing. The smooth, freshly mopped floor gave her no grip, no warning. The world seemed to slow, the ceiling above her tilting at an unnatural angle as she braced for impact. But the impact never came. Instead, she felt it, strong hands grabbing her. Her body jerked to a halt, caught mid-fall by a force much stronger than her own. Lisa gasped, her breath shallow, her heart slamming against her ribs as she found herself held up by Ethan Cole. She wasn't sure what shocked her more, the fact that she had almost fallen, or the fact that Ethan had moved fast enough to stop it. His grip was firm, unyielding, protective. One of his hands grasped her wrist, his fingers wrapping around it with ease. The other was pressed against the small of her back, steadying her. Their faces were so close, too close. Lisa's breath hitched. The world shrank, the luxury of the suite fading into irrelevance. She could see everything now, the slight furrow in Ethan's brow, the way his piercing blue eyes flickered with something she couldn't name, and most shockingly, the thing that sent a different kind of shiver down her spine. Concern. There was actual, genuine concern in his gaze. Not frustration, not irritation, not indifference. For the first time since stepping into this room, Ethan Cole looked at her like she was a person. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was Lisa's ragged breathing, her chest rising and falling rapidly as her body struggled to process what had just happened. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly on her wrist before he realized. And then, just as quickly as he had caught her, he pulled away. Lisa barely had time to register the sudden loss of warmth before she was standing on her own again, the cold air settling in between them like a barrier. Ethan cleared his throat, his jaw clenching as he ran a hand through his already tousled hair. "You should be more careful," he muttered, his voice lower than before. Lisa blinked, still trying to regain her footing, not just physically, but mentally. She swallowed, nodding quickly. Yes. Thank you, sir." There was something in the way she said it, a softness, an unspoken gratitude that made Ethan pause. His gaze lingered on her for just a second longer, as if there was something he wanted to say, but wouldn't. Then, without another word, he turned away. Lisa let out a shaky breath. What just happened? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. This was no longer just another night. Something had shifted, and she had a feeling this was only the beginning. The air between them was different now. The tension that had once been cold and distant had shifted into something else, something unfamiliar, something unspoken. Lisa steadied herself, pressing her palm against her chest, as if that would help slow the wild rhythm of her heartbeat. She wasn't sure if she was more shaken by the near fall or the fact that Ethan Cole had actually caught her. Not just caught her, but held her. For a moment, She had seen something in his eyes, concern maybe, but the second he let go, the walls went up again. Ethan cleared his throat, stepping back like he had just broken some unspoken rule. "Be careful," he said, his voice low, as if he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or scolding himself for caring. Lisa exhaled, trying to regain her composure. "Yes, of course." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, sir." Her words were genuine, even if she was still reeling from the fact that this billionaire, the man who barely acknowledged her existence minutes ago, had just stopped her from falling. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her. Really studied her. Lisa resisted the urge to shift under his gaze. Most rich men didn't look at her at all. If they did, it was with either annoyance or vague politeness before they went back to ignoring her presence. But Ethan, he was looking at her like he was trying to figure something out. And then, to Lisa's utter disbelief, he spoke. "You've been working here long?" Lisa blinked. She had expected anything but that. Why would he ask? Why would he care? She could have brushed it off, could have answered with a clipped "yes, sir," and gone about her business. But something about his tone. It didn't sound like small talk. So she answered honestly, 5 years. Ethan's expression shifted. It was subtle, but Lisa caught it. A flicker of something deep in his eyes. A memory, maybe. Why did that number matter to him? He gave a small nod, then turned away. Lisa expected that to be the end of it. End of conversation. Back to his world, back to hers. But instead, Ethan walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window, his hands slipping into his pockets as he stared at the glittering New York skyline. And then, "I used to work like that once." Lisa froze. She must have heard wrong. She must have imagined it. Because there was no way Ethan Cole, a billionaire, a man whose net worth could probably buy this entire hotel 10 times over, just admitted that he once had a job like hers. Lisa straightened. "Excuse me?" Ethan didn't turn around. His eyes were still locked on the city, as if looking at it brought back ghosts from a life he rarely thought about. "When I was a kid," he said quietly, "I cleaned offices after school." Lisa's breath hitched. He was serious. Ethan Cole, billionaire, CEO, ruthless businessman, used to clean offices. Lisa couldn't stop the question that slipped past her lips. "You?" she asked, voice filled with disbelief. Ethan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but almost. "Yes, me." Lisa had so many questions. How? Why? What happened between then and now? She had seen articles about him before. Ethan Cole, the self-made billionaire. But she had assumed his story was the same as every other rich man's. Inheritance, privilege, connections. But this was different. Lisa hesitated before saying, "I didn't know that." Ethan let out a soft, humorless chuckle. Not many do. For a moment, the room was filled with silence, not the cold, suffocating kind that had filled it earlier, but a heavier silence, a silence that carried weight. Lisa wasn't sure why, but she felt like she was standing at the edge of something bigger than just this conversation, something that could change the way she saw Ethan Cole, maybe even the way he saw himself. Lisa didn't push. She could have asked more, pried deeper, but somehow she knew that Ethan wasn't the kind of man who gave pieces of himself away so easily. But he had given her this, and for now, that was enough. Still, as she looked at him, this man who had started the night as just another arrogant billionaire, but was now something else entirely, she couldn't help but wonder. What else was Ethan Cole hiding beneath that cold, distant exterior? And why did she suddenly want to find out? Lisa wasn't sure what stunned her more, the fact that Ethan Cole had just admitted to struggling, or the fact that he had compared himself to her. Her entire life, She had seen men like him from a distance, powerful, distant, rich beyond imagination, men who never noticed women like her. And yet here he was, looking straight at her, not with pity, not with superiority, but with something that almost felt like understanding. Ethan let out a long breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Not exactly as a cleaner," he said, his voice quieter this time, "but I worked 3 jobs just to survive." Lisa felt her breath hitch. 3 jobs, she had one, and it drained her every single day. 3, Ethan continued, his gaze drifting slightly, as if he were no longer standing in the luxury suite, but back in the past, in the life he had worked so hard to escape. Dishwasher, warehouse loader, even janitorial work. Lisa's chest tightened. She knew those jobs. She knew the exhaustion that came with them, the way they took and took and took, until there was nothing left of you at the end of the day. She had never imagined Ethan Cole doing work like that, but now, as she watched him standing there, his face shadowed by old memories, she realized the billionaire standing before her wasn't so different from the woman still cleaning his suite. Ethan let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Nobody saw me then," he murmured. "Just like I almost didn't see you today." Lisa felt something deep inside her twist at those words. He understood. The feeling of being invisible. The feeling of being nothing more than a background character in someone else's world. Ethan had lived it. And now, standing in the middle of this penthouse suite, dressed in an expensive suit, worth more money than she could ever dream of. He was admitting it. For the first time since meeting him, Lisa saw not the billionaire, not the cold CEO, but the man. "I had people look at me like I was nothing," Ethan continued, his voice lower now, almost like he was confessing something he had never said out loud before. Lisa swallowed hard. She knew exactly what he meant, the way people would barely acknowledge your presence, the way they would hand you $1 without even looking at your face, the way their gazes would pass right over you, as if you were nothing but part of the wallpaper. Ethan's jaw tightened. "And I told myself—" His blue eyes darkened, the smirk on his lips turning almost bitter. "One day I'd be rich enough that no one could ignore me." Lisa exhaled softly. She understood now why he worked the way he did, why people called him ruthless, why he had built an empire that could not be ignored, because once upon a time he had been nothing, and he had sworn to himself that he would never feel that way again. Lisa hesitated before speaking. "And now that you're rich," she started, carefully choosing her words, "do you still feel seen?" Ethan's smirk faded. The room fell into complete silence. Lisa watched as something flickered in his eyes, something raw, something vulnerable. For the first time he looked lost. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to answer, but then nothing. Because for all the millions, for all the power, for all the people who now knew his name, Lisa had just asked him the one question he had never dared to ask himself. And maybe, for the first time in years, Ethan Cole wasn't sure if he knew the answer. The air was thick with something unspoken. Lisa could see it in Ethan's eyes, that flicker of hesitation, that struggle deep inside him. For the first time, someone had challenged him to face the truth, and just as he was about to answer, bam! The suite's door burst open. Lisa jumped slightly, startled by the sudden noise. The quiet, intimate moment between them was shattered like fragile glass. And then a man stormed in, tall, middle-aged, sharply dressed in a navy blue suit, carrying an air of arrogance that clung to him like cheap cologne. Lisa had never seen him before, but she already knew exactly who he was. One of them, the kind of men who strutted around hotels like they owned every inch of the place, the kind who never acknowledged staff unless they needed something, the kind who made people like her feel small, Mr. Reynolds. She heard the name before, one of Ethan's senior executives, a powerful man in his own right, but standing next to Ethan, even he was careful. Except right now, Reynolds wasn't careful. He was angry. His sharp eyes flicked toward Ethan. "Sir, I've been waiting for you downstairs," he said, irritation laced in his voice. His eyes barely brushed over Lisa, like she was nothing more than background noise. Then his lips twisted into a smirk. "Didn't realize you were occupied." Lisa felt her stomach twist. She knew exactly what he meant. The tone, the dismissive way he said it, the implication dripping from his voice. "Women like you don't belong here. You are invisible. You are nothing." Lisa cast a quick glance at Ethan, expecting him to brush it off, to let it go, like rich men always did. But his reaction, it surprised her. Ethan's jaw tightened, his entire posture stiffening. The muscle in his cheek twitched, and for the first time, Lisa saw something cold and dangerous flicker in his blue eyes. It wasn't just irritation. It was anger. When he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it. A warning. Lisa was just doing her job. Lisa's breath caught. It was a simple sentence. But the way Ethan said it, firm, steady, with a hint of protectiveness, felt like something more. Mr. Reynolds raised a brow. Then he scoffed. "Of course, sir." His lips curled as he turned to Lisa, looking at her fully for the first time since stepping into the room, not as a person, as a nuisance. A maid. "You may go now, Maid." Lisa knew that tone. She had heard it her entire life. Dismissal, superiority, a reminder that she wasn't supposed to be seen. For a second she felt frozen. Not because she was surprised. She had dealt with this kind of treatment for years. But because for the first time she had started to feel seen. And now, in a single sentence, Reynolds had snatched that feeling away. Lisa gripped the cleaning cloth tightly in her hands, forcing her breathing to stay steady. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much it stung. She knew her worth, even if men like Reynolds didn't. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and turned to leave. But just before she reached the door, Ethan spoke again, and what he said next stopped her in her tracks. Lisa was already gripping the door handle, ready to walk away, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. This was the way of the world. She had spent years learning when to stay silent, when to disappear, when to swallow her pride, so she did what she always did. She turned away. But then, "Lisa, wait." Her heart stopped. She turned back, confused, because that voice, that wasn't dismissal, that wasn't indifference. That was command. Lisa wasn't the only one who froze. Reynolds stiffened, his brows pulling together in irritation. This wasn't supposed to happen. Men like Ethan, billionaires, CEOs, men with power, didn't defend people like her. They didn't stop their high-ranking executives just to acknowledge the feelings of a hotel maid. And yet, Ethan was doing exactly that. Lisa watched as Ethan walked toward Reynolds, slow and deliberate, not in anger, in power. He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to demand respect. He was respect. And when he spoke, his voice was sharp, calm, and absolute. "I don't tolerate disrespect, Reynolds." Reynolds flinched. Lisa's breath hitched. She had never, not in all her years working this job, seen a man like Ethan stand up for someone like her. Reynolds' expression darkened. He let out a sharp breath, clearly trying to keep his frustration in check. "Sir, Now!" It was just one word, but it was enough. Lisa saw it happen in real time, the moment Reynolds realized he had lost. Because this wasn't a request, this was a command, and no one disobeyed Ethan Cole. Lisa could hardly believe what she was seeing. Reynolds swallowed, his face twisted in discomfort, as if apologizing to a maid was the worst thing he had ever been asked to do. He turned to her, and with zero sincerity, zero real regret, he muttered under his breath, "I'm sorry." Lisa met his gaze. She didn't say a word, because she didn't need his apology. She needed people like him to change. She could see it in his face. He wasn't sorry. Not for the way he treated her, not for the way he looked at her, not for the way he saw people like her as nothing more than background noise. And Lisa knew in her heart that a forced apology meant nothing. That meant everything. Because for the first time, someone with real power had seen her, had defended her, had made it clear that people like Reynolds didn't get to decide who deserved respect. Lisa wasn't sure what stunned her more, the fact that Ethan had done it, or the fact that in his piercing blue eyes she saw something no one had ever shown her before. Genuine respect. And that was worth more than any apology. Lisa stood frozen, her fingers curled around the cleaning cloth in her hand, its edges damp from the work she had been doing just moments ago. She wasn't sure if she had heard Ethan correctly. Did he just offer her something? Did a billionaire just acknowledge her, not as a maid, not as someone in the background, but as a person with potential? Her heart pounded in her chest. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, ignored, treated as if she was nothing more than a shadow in the presence of powerful men like Ethan Cole. And yet, here he was, looking at her, seeing her. Lisa swallowed hard. I don't understand," she finally managed to say. Ethan took a slow breath, his piercing blue eyes steady on her. He wasn't offering this lightly. This wasn't some billionaire's careless act of charity. "I have a foundation," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "It helps hard-working people get the opportunities they deserve, but never had." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Like I once needed." Lisa blinked. She had spent years keeping her head down, never expecting a hand to reach out for her, never expecting someone to notice her struggle, let alone care. And here he was, offering her a lifeline. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan must have noticed her hesitation. He took a step forward, keeping his gaze locked on hers. "It's not a handout, Lisa," he continued. "It's an opportunity. The same kind someone once gave me." Lisa stared at him, her emotions a storm raging inside her. She thought of her mother, who had worked herself to the bone to put food on the table. She thought of her younger brother, struggling to pay his college tuition. She thought of all the nights she had come home, exhausted, knowing that no matter how hard she worked, she would always be stuck in the same place. This offer, it wasn't just about her. It was about breaking a cycle. Still, a part of her hesitated. Could she trust this? Could she trust him? "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if he had expected that question. "Because once I was just like you," he admitted. "Invisible, overlooked, fighting to survive while people walked past me without a second glance." His expression darkened, as if old memories were resurfacing. "I worked 3 jobs just to afford a single meal some nights, and I told myself, if I ever made it, I'd make sure people like me didn't have to fight alone." Lisa's throat tightened. She had spent years believing that men like him didn't care, that the rich never looked down long enough to see the people cleaning their floors, serving their food, making their lives more comfortable. And yet, here was Ethan Cole, not just offering help, but understanding her struggle. Lisa took a slow, shaky breath. "I don't know if I belong anywhere else," she admitted. Ethan frowned. "You don't belong here, cleaning up after people who don't even see you," he said firmly. "You have something more in you, Lisa. You just need a chance to prove it." She exhaled sharply, looking away for a moment. It was terrifying to consider something beyond what she had known. For 5 years this had been her life, the scrubbing, the sweeping, the being invisible. Could she really step into something else? Her fingers trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on the cloth in her hand. "What if I fail?" she whispered. Ethan didn't hesitate. Then you try again." His words were simple, but they hit her like a wave. No one had ever told her that before. No one had ever given her the space to fail and still be worth something. She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "And what if I don't know how to succeed?" Ethan's expression softened. "Then I'll help you figure it out." A lump formed in Lisa's throat. No one had ever offered to stand beside her. She had always been on her own. And now this man, this powerful, rich, intimidating man, was offering her something she never thought she'd have. A chance. Lisa closed her eyes for a brief second. She thought of all the people who had never gotten this chance. She thought of her mother's calloused hands, her brother's tired eyes, the younger version of herself who had once dreamed of something more. And then she made her decision. Lisa opened her eyes and met Ethan's gaze. She nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "I want to try." Ethan's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. A flicker of approval, of respect. "Then let's get started," he said. Lisa inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This was the beginning of something new, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Lisa stood frozen in the center of the luxurious hotel suite, her mind spinning. Just moments ago, she had been nothing more than a maid, scrubbing floors and wiping down counters. But now, Ethan Cole, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had offered her something she never expected. A chance. She still held the cleaning cloth in her hand, her fingers gripping it tightly, as if it were the only thing grounding her to reality. Was this real? Did he really mean what he said? "Lisa?" Ethan's voice was softer now, no longer the cold and detached tone he had used when they first met. "Are you okay?" Lisa blinked and swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She had spent years pushing down emotions, convincing herself that her dreams didn't matter because people like her weren't supposed to have them. She hesitated. "I don't know what to say." Ethan gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything yet. Just think about it." Lisa exhaled slowly. Think about it? There was nothing to think about. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him. He wasn't the ruthless billionaire she had read about in business magazines. There was something deeper beneath the surface. He understood what it was like to struggle, to be invisible. That was why he had noticed her. And now, he was giving her a choice. Not out of pity, not because he felt guilty, but because he believed in her. Lisa had worked at this hotel for 5 years. 5 years of early mornings and late nights. 5 years of overhearing guests talk about million-dollar deals while she changed their bed sheets. 5 years of swallowing her pride when people spoke down to her. But that was all about to change. The next morning, Lisa walked into the hotel with a different feeling in her chest. Hope. She had accepted Ethan's offer, and within hours, things had begun moving faster than she ever imagined. Ethan's foundation was designed to help hard-working people like her, people who had the drive but not the means. He had introduced her to business training courses, mentorship programs, and even helped her enroll in evening classes. Lisa had never felt more terrified, and yet she had never felt more alive. The first few weeks were tough. She sat in rooms full of people who had college degrees, people who had never known what it was like to clean up after someone else. At times, she felt out of place, like she didn't belong, but she refused to quit. Because every night when she lay in bed, exhausted but hopeful, she reminded herself, "This is what you prayed for. This is what you worked for. Don't let fear take it from you." And so, she pushed forward. She studied harder. She asked more questions. She made mistakes, but learned from them. Until one day, something incredible happened. 1 year later, Lisa wasn't wearing her old maid uniform anymore. She stood in the grand hotel lobby, wearing a tailored navy blue blazer with her name embroidered on a golden badge, Lisa Williams, hotel manager. She had done it. Lisa had worked her way up from a cleaner to a leader. And as she walked through the hallways, she saw the way people looked at her now, with respect. But Lisa hadn't forgotten where she came from. She made sure the hotel's cleaning staff was treated with dignity. She started programs that helped other hard-working employees get opportunities to grow. She paid it forward, because she knew how it felt to be invisible, and she refused to let anyone else feel that way. Lisa's journey had been incredible, but she wasn't the only one who had changed. Ethan Cole, the billionaire who once thought money was the only thing that mattered, had been transformed too. That night in the hotel suite had awakened something in him. He had spent years believing that success was measured in profits and power, but Lisa had shown him something else. Success is also measured in impact, in kindness, in the lives we change. And so Ethan began paying attention. He started visiting his foundation more often, personally mentoring people who came from tough backgrounds. He didn't just donate money, he invested in people, and every time he saw someone rise up from nothing, he thought about Lisa. He thought about how close he had been to overlooking her, and he vowed never to make that mistake again. One evening, months after Lisa became a manager, Ethan visited the hotel again, this time not as a distant billionaire, but as someone who had grown. He walked through the grand lobby, passing by employees who now greeted him with admiration, not because of his wealth, but because of what he had done for Lisa and others like her. He stepped into the same presidential suite where he had first met her. But this time, she was the one in charge. Lisa stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. When she turned around and saw Ethan, she smiled. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole," Ethan smirked. "I think you can call me Ethan now," Lisa chuckled. "Old habits." He looked around the pristine suite. "I see you still run a tight ship." She shrugged playfully. "What can I say? I learned from the best." For a moment they just stood there, two people from completely different worlds, yet forever connected by a single moment in time. And then Ethan said something Lisa would never forget. "I used to believe that money was the only way to be seen," he admitted. "But you—" He paused, shaking his head in admiration. "You proved me wrong." Lisa's smile softened, because for the first time in her life, she didn't just feel seen, she felt respected. She felt valued. She felt worthy. And that was something money could never buy. Lisa's story wasn't just her story. It was the story of every person who had ever been overlooked, of every worker who had been treated as less, of every individual who had been judged by their job instead of their potential. She was proof that hard work and determination matter. She was proof that respect should never be based on wealth, but on character. And she was proof that kindness has the power to change lives. Because at the end of the day, no matter how rich or poor, no matter our job title or background, we all just want to be seen. We all just want to matter. And if we choose to look past status, past money, past stereotypes, we might just find something extraordinary.